All right, so welcome back to Reiki Rewind, our podcast, The Never Ending Conversation.
Hello, hello.
So Watson and I are here. Sorry we missed last week. We were both a little busy, but today we want to move on to the topic of putting science in the context of religion and trying to figure out the similarities between the two and if the scientific mind and collective is actually more similar to a religion than most people assume.
Mm-hmm.
And so to start off, we would like to first go over the three founding principles or main topics that we had talked about that make a religion. So the first one being the collective, like-minded collective. So the community that's built around this idea. The second would be the rituals that each person that partakes in this religion or this mind collective will undergo and participate in. And then the third would be the unseen or hierarchy of a force that's greater than the human ego and the human self that sort of governs and controls what is occurring in everyday life. So those are the three sort of core principles that we had discussed last podcast that would be very definitive across all religions. And so now we'd like to talk on which parts of the scientific mind and collective as a more of a religious organization and what types of principles from science fit these
the
three cores. Yes.
Of a religion.
Exactly.
Yeah. Let's see. So we were just talking about science as a religion, considering how it could be a religion. And one of the things that strikes me is how, because for thousands of years, we didn't have the scientific method, which was essentially invented by Sir Francis Bacon in the Enlightenment period in Europe. But before we had the scientific method, we had a greater prevalence of ghost stories and beliefs in the supernatural, and they were more widely accepted because people didn't think to look for evidence of something being the case or not, so that whenever science got its foothold in European culture and started driving things, people did tend to flock to science who were disenfranchised by organized religions, and they were just looking for stability, structure, answers.
Yeah.
Here comes science. It seems to be shining a light on the darkness of religious superstitions, the darkness of the Middle Ages.
Yeah, one of the big things too with science, being like you were saying, the scientific method, right, is the repeatability of these experiments and being able to get the same results or forecast a prediction of what's going to happen, right? Whereas a lot of religious institutes would have some sort of forecast or seer that's within the organization that would, make prophecies. Really, the prophecies of science need to also have the ability to be observed because they have the forecasting through mathematics, right? They're using some sort of model to show that this is how it's going to happen.
Right.
And then when it happens, it's like, see, I told you my model is sound, it works, right?
But there does seem to be some sort of psychological and social phenomenon where, there's the core of the scientific method, and whenever you do unbiased science, you're doing humanity a justice, and it's a good thing. But then there's a dogmatic structure that slowly builds up, and it's very subtle. It's more subtle, rather, don't know if it's very subtle, but it's comparably more subtle than the power structure and the belief structures that are built around the core religious principles of the belief in angels and heaven and God, the divine, and the spirit, eternity, and the soul.
Yeah, and that's that higher force, the unseen force that the religious institutes have a belief in, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I'd like to bring up now at this point the unseen force of science, which would be your quantum mechanics and your special relativity theories, right?
Yeah.
The theories of gravity and how things move in outer space.
They believe in, but might not be something that they can prove physically.
Because it's still just a theory, right? Like, it's a very sound theory. It holds its weight, and predictions that are based on it are very accurate.
Yeah, relativity theory does have tests where, time seems to be slowing down.
Exactly.
But there's other interpretations. There's at least one other way that you can interpret time slowing down as just motion. How quickly you move through time.
And one of the big things that's with these two theories is that they don't work together.
They don't.
Right? Like, you can't use your special relativity on objects of very small weights or mass, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, quantum mechanics can't really explain very well much of the motion that we see. It's more about the very small particles.
Yeah.
Right? And so it's trying to explain, I think, that same force that those scientists believe in, right? It's like
they have to assume that things will fit together. They're just not looking at it right yet. Like, things do make total sense. They can just figure out how they're going about it the wrong way. But in culture, like, because you've got theism, and then this religious science thing, it's to me, it's like a scientific rationalism gone haywire, where it's this tendency in people to get on a high horse and want to say that people who believe in God are stupid.
Yeah, because why would you believe in something you can't see? Well, I guess we can observe gravity, but we don't see it. We don't see gravitational waves, really.
And people want to be right. That's another big psychological factor for why a lot of people would be atheistic scientific rationalists, is because it's wailing the loudest. It's the one speaking the loudest about, like, oh, I know I'm right and I can prove that I'm right. And then people by the millions flock to that because, they don't want to be wrong, and they want to be able to, like, make fun of the people who are allegedly incorrect.
Exactly, right? It's that, I guess, it's your ego, right? It's your ego pushing you to that extent of, like, I am right. Look at all these other people that are completely in the wrong,
mm-hmm.
right? And that's why we see also with the religions, the amount of wars and atrocities that happen, because they're like, your religion's wrong, my religion's right.
Mm-hmm.
And it's almost a justification, right?
Yeah.
And so that brings us to our second point of the community, right? That sort of organized mind collective. Right?
Science has a collective too, especially with, like, new change. If it's like new discoveries or something that, like, rocks the boat too much, it tends to, like, can have a lot of pushback. And if it's something really radical, like, say for instance, like free energy or something, then forget about it. They're not gonna allow you to get away with that.
That's it. It's that collective mind, right? This group of people that are always doing the research.
Not Einstein, what Eisenhower called his farewell address, I believe. Eisenhower's was he dubbed it the military-industrial complex.
Okay.
And that's, part military, part industry, but it leaves out the banks, but, there's hardly ever a perfect way to describe anything, but yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But so going back a bit to like the
Just
community,
saying that,
right? Like there's
the scientific establishment has a lot of money and military power that and relations. It can be easily related to the military and
exactly, it's because with science, right, it's very much rooted in reality, right? They want to explain the happenings of everyday life, right? Whereas with religion, they're not so focused on what's going to happen for everybody every day. You know, they're more focused on like what's happening as like a whole general species, as where we're going, right? And so yeah, there's that collective of these scientific minds, right? And it's just like Christianity or just like Islam, right? It's this group of people all over the world that buy into these same ideas, these ideologies, and are trying to bring them to every corner of the world.
Exactly.
Just as Christianity tried to expand and go everywhere, right? Bring it to America, bring it to Asia, bring it to, South America, to Africa. It's all over the place now, right? And it's just like science. They're trying to bring it to every corner of the globe.
So if science can be a religion or quasi-religion, religion-like, it could be a good religion or a bad religion. And if it's a bad religion, we don't want it. We don't need it.
Well, I think
what does it look like? It looks like the situation that we have now,
Yeah, it's hard to define what a good religion and a bad religion is, right?
Yeah.
Because people that are following the religion believe it's a good one. But I think you really just got to look at like what does that community bring to the whole world community, right? And I think science, in the context of as being a religion trying to spread its ideologies across the whole world, it is bettering the world for the most part, right? Like a lot of the science-based technological revolutions that we've had are, the ability to be able to even just record what we're talking about right now, right? And put it on the internet. It's a great communication tool. It's brought forward our ability to travel the world. It's been great, right? So I think it's in the good side, but there is some bad parts to it.
And the pursuit of science is different and must be distinguished from people's psychological hangups. Like just because some smart, educated atheists like to, talk all day or redefine themselves and make a living making fun of Christians, is that doing humanity a service or not?
Yeah, that would be, I guess, the parts that are bad, right? Where, I think science should really just try to stay as unbiased as they can, right? They're really focused on the happenings in the material world.
I'm only prepared to admit that God exists if he can be proven to exist.
Yeah.
Right? And so he just isn't available for viewing now because he doesn't care about you trying to prove that he exists or not. It's not his priority. He's not worried about it. He can't be. Otherwise, he would be here proving that he exists. Yeah. And since he's not doing that, we have to assume that if he exists, that there's other reasons for not revealing himself directly, but that, again, we find reasons, we find motivations to start with, but we eventually find strong feelings, and then we just search and look for reasons.
So I think
that he exists, and I personally believe that if we interpret nature correctly, then we will conclude that God must exist, and then eventually we will discover.
I think the big thing is we need to sort of change maybe our definition of existing, right? We're us as these material beings, right? Existing is the wood that is growing in the tree, or the fans, or the electricity that's used to light our houses. That stuff exists to us, right? And so when we think about existence, maybe we need to change our definition of existence, because he exists, but just because we can't experience his existence at a
Here and
continual
now,
or constant
right,
rate, right? Like we
right.
only experience it in some circumstances
Yeah,
of
exactly.
special times when
But
whether it's on psychedelics
not on
or
tap,
deep meditation. It's not
not
just
always
something that's
there.
I'm able to go and experience God right now. Just
Yeah,
snap
you
my
have to
fingers.
die and be reborn. So
Yeah, so maybe the existence needs to be redefined, and maybe we'll be able to experience that existence redefinition through quantum mechanics, right? They're trying pretty hard
yeah,
to figure out,
exactly.
you know,
They're trying to figure out all kinds of quantum computing, teleporting,
yeah,
cl-
especially because part
uh,
of like the foundations of it is trying to figure out what is actually existing. Like
yeah,
when does this atom exist? When it's observed, or when it's is it always just there? Or they're trying to
exactly.
get that definition down, right? And that might, once they
Mm,
figure it out, change our perception of what existence is,
yeah.
right? Like yes, we exist, but to
See,
what extent do we exist compared to
and
the
that's,
existence of everything else?
I really think that's where philosophy gains potency, if it ever was impotent for a time to begin with, but it gains potency because we're talking about what exists, and since we can't observe things that we're not observing, just a fact of logic, but we want to be able to know things about, like, see, that's the problem with science, because we want to be able to know things about things in general, like know things about things when we're not observing them. And uh, so if if the sun or Pluto, we'll say, if Pluto exists when no one is observing it, it existed, and it existed like millions of years ago before anybody observed it. In order for that to be true, that Pluto existed when no one was observing it, to me at least, it seems like you have to require that it truly exists, because you're presenting a hypothetical situation. Maybe Pluto exists, maybe it doesn't. You represent it with a sentence. X exists. In this case, it's the planet Pluto. If And we have to ask the question, what's the nature of truth? Because if the statement that Pluto exists is not true, then Pluto doesn't exist. They're just connected. But the statement and its potential to be true are related back to the actual state of affairs, but they seem to have a continuous, at least hypothetically, have a continuous correlation where this hypothetical sentence, it's a property of objects in conceptual space where every object has conceptual properties. And in order for this object, Pluto, in this case, to exist when it is not being perceived, if you assume that truth itself, as a quality that's attached to a sentence that you're going to say, oh, this sentence is true, this sentence is false, this sentence is an opinion and has no truth value. But Pluto exists is either true or false if we know what words we're using and we understand the sentence. And then we come along and we're like, well, what's the nature of truth? If truth is restricted to the mind, then there's no way that you can get truth to attach in a hypothetical sentence that might be some sort of conceptual quality of an object that we're like proposing exists outside of our ability to perceive it. And if you don't get truth in there, then it can't have its truth value is, it doesn't get it. It's not accessed. It can't access it. It can't access the truth. And if it can't get its corresponding sentence, I exist, like this thing exists, to register with truth and have it, then, well, does that thing even exist or not? And, you know, it comes down to the question then, can anything exist without truly existing? Is truth something that we really need? And I think that it is, and I think that it's absolutely foolhardy to try and build a picture of anything without holding on to what is true. And if we need truth, and if truth is even required to even get at the existential truthhood of things when they're not being observed, then this concept is very important and timeless, perhaps, and going to then flipping on the other side of the coin, if you say that truth is not restricted to the mind, because that's the first part of the premise. You say if truth is only restricted to the human mind, then there's no way that anything could truly exist until it was perceived by a human mind. Okay. Absolute logical fact.
So that maybe that's that unseen force that science is trying to chase, right?
Exactly. So I know that was kind of hard to spit out, and I'm not the most eloquent person in the world, especially these days, but that's called the prior mind dilemma, and that's trying to get at the idea when I first got into that rambling, that rant, which was that where science leaves off is where philosophy, which is the science of the mind, kind of tries to pick up the pieces. And what we think that we can show is that omnipresent, which means everywhere, a mind is everywhere in space and time and is perceiving all objects when we're not perceiving them, and giving them that conception and ensuring basically that conceptual.
Yeah, and to me that's the Akashic records that are spoken about in like a lot of Eastern philosophies, right?
Yeah.
Especially Hinduism. It's so sorry, I guess maybe just to move on. We do have one last little, I guess, of the three principles that we were talking about, just to touch on before we wrap up the podcast. So I wanted to talk a little bit about maybe the rituals, right? So every religion has rituals that they participate in, whether it's communion or the fasts and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's bashing Christians. Christian bashing. That's like a ritual of the bad version of scientific rationalism, is to
it could be almost in that sense for sure, right? Like they like to,
especially when Halloween, because we got a Halloween around the corner, and whether it's Christmas or what, they're always
picking apart those religious sort of holidays.
It's reinforcing to their kids, right? That this family, look how quaint and backwards they are. They tell their kids that Santa Claus exists for a few years and let them develop their imagination. Man, I can remember, I wouldn't take it back for the world, thinking that those few years where I heard my parents in the living room and thought that it was Santa Claus,
the Easter Bunny, right?
Yeah, and thought that they were some supernatural being come to bring me a present. The effect that has on the mind, and just the fact that even being human, as we've said, is can be related to the belief.
Well, it's great to keep your mind open,
of the possibility that God exists, but even more fundamentally and basic than that, I think, is just the ability to use the human imagination.
Yeah, and so
if you can there is
a few like you're saying, those types of religious sort of bashing, right? But the one sort of thing that I want to touch on more is when people go to become pastors or ministers, they go to school, right, and study the Bible or whatever religious text that they're going to be preaching.
That's right.
It's very similar with science, right? If you want to be a scientist, you go to school, you sit there and you study for hours. You're learning your physics, your mathematics, you're learning your biochemistry. If you want to start studying psych or philosophy or anthropology,
right?
You can even try to lump history in there as a context for the story of the human being and how we were coming from clay, basically, right?
History of science.
Yeah, exactly. So there's these, every chemistry student goes in and does their titrations. Every physics student, tries to get a grasp of how gravity works.
And they're all indoctrinated into the theory of, global warming. It could be that we're not having as much of an effect as they think. And, again, with anything being a religion, it doesn't matter what the facts are. It's where the money for the grants is coming from, is for research in certain areas. And whenever the government funds research in certain areas, that's when science suffers, and that builds up corruption as well.
And so, so there's a lot of these sort of religious, you do your experiments, you grow cells in a petri dish, you check bacteria and grow them on agar. There's a lot of these sort of small knowledge gaining rituals, which is all the rituals are really for in actual religion, right? You're just doing these rituals until something clicks about what the teachings are, and you realize, oh, that's why we're doing this, and that makes more sense now. And then you continue doing it, right? It's the same with these rituals or these experiments that go on in a lot of scientific fields. They go and they participate in them until they get that knowledge to click, and then they go, I understand how this is working now, okay.
Yeah.
Right? And so then that's sort
see
of...
it for yourself, and then
and
then you can become a teacher.
Exactly. And then that's when you become that scientist now, and you're allowed to go off and do your research.
Yeah.
So I think let's try and wrap it up there, because our second...
I get what you're... Sorry. That's sort of like the process of like being ordained. It's sort of analogous, right? Like, whether it's reading the Bible 100 times or going to Switzerland and seeing the particle collider. After that, now you have your Jedi lightsaber. Like, only then. So you get that experience.
Exactly. So then
you have made me proud of you.
Yeah, exactly. So those are sort of like the rituals that I see that would make science as part of a religion. Right?
Oh, dude! In fact, even with that Star Wars reference, like the Jedi is even referred to as a religion. Like the Jedi Order is referred to as a religion by the.
Okay. So let's just quickly recap what we went over on here. So we talked about how there's a large scientific community that wants to, or is currently spreading scientific dogma across the entirety of the globe. Then we talked a bit about how there is this unifying belief in a unseen force or unseen forces, because right now there's these two forces of general relativity and quantum mechanics that are the forces that sort of are the foundation of scientific research and belief. And then we talked a bit about the rituals that are mostly participated in by all students that are trying to become scientists or are just studying science in general. They go through very similar ritualistic experimentations of whatever discipline of science that they're participating in. And so they're doing these in an attempt to get that knowledge that they're learning from the books to click, and similar to like doing a fast, Ramadan fast. There's a reason that they do these fasts so that you can get an understanding of your body doesn't really require as much food as we're told that it does, right? You restrict your eating, and so you get that knowledge to click that, okay, maybe we are overeating, or we're just doing something that's not completely correct. So that's sort of where we're going with science and trying to put it into that religious understanding. And so to me, it's a very clear sight that religion and science are almost the same thing. It's just that science as its own religion is more rooted in trying to define materialism.
I think maybe a nexus of where science and religion can come together is over psychedelics. and scientifically trying to understand brain chemistry and psychologically how
Yeah, and
these
we'll have to do a
experiences,
podcast maybe on that as well.
affect.
So yeah, we'll
the
maybe
mind.
save that for another podcast later if anybody's interested. But our next podcast, and we've already talked a little bit on it, is going to be on some of the issues with the dogma of the scientific thought. And Watson already touched on a few of them. So in our next podcast, we are going to dive a little bit more deeper into some of the corruption that we see when looking at science as a whole.
Cool.
So thank you very much for taking the time to listen. This is Watson and Ryan signing off. So don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so that you do not miss out on our next podcast. All right. Thank you very much. Have a nice day.
Thank you. Take care.